Hi, I'm Ethan Baird, the Executive Director of NERFA, and I'm here to welcome you to the NERFA 365 programming for 2022. We're kicking it off with a wonderful panel with three wonderful people talking about a tool that many of us have looked at over the last 2 to 3 years, but many of us looked at it and said, I don't know if it can work for me. And we're here to show that it can and does work for people in three very different ways. So we're here to talk about Patreon, and particularly crowdfunding sources that aren't single project related. This is about establishing a group of fans, a group of people that are there to support you in a long-term process, and what that can mean to your career and what you can do with it. I'd like to welcome and thank our three panelists. More information on them is available in the video right up below. Ellis Paul, master songwriter, who during the pandemic pivoted his entire fan base into the Patreon community and turned that into his way of communicating directly with his fan base. Rebecca Loebe, who's written a fantastic book on how to start your Patreon engagement, how to create a community and build and utilize that space, as well as tools to create better and higher quality engagement with those people. James Downs of Forest Park DIY / The End of America, who's got a fantastic podcast on being an independent artist, is a spectacular musician who tours with his band, End of America, and shares what creating an entire themed community for his band has meant. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we look forward to doing more with you over the next year.
Well, should we start at the beginning, maybe?
I think it's a good place.
I think the beginning is a very good place to start. I feel like someone said that once.
Bilbo
How to
Baggins.
launching Bilbo Baggins. Yes, exactly. So how to launch a Patreon page is a topic that I got mildly obsessed with last year. During the lockdown, I helped a lot of my friends launch Patreon pages and eventually took all of the emails and timelines and checklists that I had written for people and compiled them all into one big list, one big document, and put together an ebook that is, what did I call it? Patreon Launch Tips by Rebecca Loebe. It is available free on the internet. I'm not trying to make money off anybody else's Patreon page, but I just wanted to have like one spot that I could point people to when they ask how to start a Patreon page. So you can find that here on YouTube. It's in the description of this video. And the very first thing that I mention is that I think it's really important to calibrate your expectations. I think it's important to know that Patreon communities are built from existing communities. It's very rare that somebody who has no connections or experience or audience launches a Patreon page and has a giant following. So I think it's worth asking yourself, what is your goal? And I always think it's important or helpful to set a goal that's not numerical, not like I want 7 million followers, but like I want to find the people who are most excited about my work and connect with them directly and sort of think about it in terms of quality of the relationship instead of in terms of quantity.
Mm.
Does that make sense to you too?
Yeah.
Does that resonate?
Yeah. Although those numerical things can have meaning if like you're desperate to pay rent with the numbers, and
Absolutely.
Patreon is the source of something that is equated to that number, then that makes sense. But it's not really about that. I think it's more about the content and then figuring out who you are in that space and what the people that are there want to experience with you.
I saw a Patreon talk where somebody from the company said that a good rule of thumb is that you can count on having 1% of your largest social media platform convert to being Patreon followers, which for me was like dead on because at the time I had 35,000 Twitter followers and 350 patrons. And I was like, how did you do that? That's just creepy, spooky, weird math.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool. What you mentioned before about like setting your expectations really resonated with me because we didn't start our Patreon until this year because we were just so intimidated by the process. And it is a lot harder to convert folks over to Patreon than we anticipated, but let's say it was as hard as we were told it was. And we're like, oh yeah, this is not an easy thing to do. Very important thing and worthwhile thing, but it's not super easy. So I think that that's a really important point to calibrate your expectations.
I've talked to people who say like, "Oh, I've done Kickstarters and I've, when I put out the call, my people show up. Like I've got this, and then are surprised or disappointed by it being what my friend Raina Rose calls a slow burn. It is sort of a slow uphill climb getting people to sign up for your Patreon page because you're asking people to put their credit card information into a new website and give you permission to draw from it monthly. That's a big ask. That's not like a one-time purchase. That's not, going to a concert. That's not a moment of support. It's like a long commitment of support.
Right.
It's a
The good
repeated
news,
ask too, because
yes,
every
that's true.
month there's a little ding in their bank account and they're like, I have to make this decision again.
Right.
12 times a year. Do I really want to stay here? And is it worth it? And what's the future here with me and this Patreon page? So to me, I mean, this is why when they started to do the, purchase your subscription for the year thing, I was very, very grateful, because that way it wasn't just sort of poking the people every month and saying, hey,
Mhm.
you're giving X number of dollars to Ellis. And, so the yearly thing, I think, really helped open things up for my crew.
That's cool.
Something that I do think is the good flip side of that is that although there is some attrition, people come and go every month for sure. I find that once people are signed up for your Patreon page, they are pretty likely to stick around for, it's because it's a big action to unsubscribe. So people take that pretty seriously and tend to hang around for a while, which I think is really great. Well, I think we've covered expectations. And I'm not going to go step by step through everything in the ebook, but if you are interested in launching, I have made it available and I recommend you check it out. But with big red flashing lights at the very beginning, what I believe to be the most important step of launching a Patreon page is sitting quietly with yourself and asking why you do this. Not why you want a Patreon page, but why do you make music, make podcasts, paint pictures, do whatever the art is that you're looking to support through a Patreon page. I have heard it said, it's in a great TED talk by Todd Sinek. Is that his name? Tim Sinek? Shoot, I should have looked that up before I said it out loud. Great TED talk that says people don't support what you do, they support why you're doing it. So I think that when you're putting together any kind of ask, whether it's for crowdfunding or for Patreon or whatnot, saying like, oh, I'm going to go into the studio and work with these Grammy winning producers and, we're going to do this and accomplish that and achieve that. That's good information, but that's not what draws people in. What draws people in is your mission, is the reason why you feel compelled to create this art, what it is inside of you that makes you want to do this, and what it is that pushes you forward. So when I was first confronted with that question in this capacity, I sat and just wrote pages and pages in my journal because I didn't actually know why. I'd been touring professionally for over 10 years, and I had never really stopped to consider what compelled me to do it. It had just been my sort of sole obsession since I graduated from college. I'd had my eyes on the horizon. I'd been marching towards the prize. And I never really stopped to think about what it was about this art form, about performance, about singing, about songwriting that compelled me to get out of my bed every day and work, this weird job, these weird hours, drive thousands and thousands of miles and sleep in different beds every night and learn how to use a different shower every day. It's like not just applause. It's not just laughter from an audience. Like no one likes applause that much, I don't think. And for me, what I found at the bottom of my quest was that I believe that bringing people together with music has the potential to help people, to heal people, to give people an opportunity to process their emotions in a culture that does not really encourage people to process emotion. So, at the core of what I'm doing, I came to that answer and I try and lead with that when I am describing my Patreon to people, when I, in my writing on the homepage about, why I want people to join my Patreon page. Um, and I think everyone's answers are going to be a little different. And I think that if you haven't taken that time to sort of ask yourself that question, that right now at the beginning of your journey with Patreon is a great time to do it. I recommend writing just several pages in a journal because you can come back to that, reread it, draw from it as you are writing the text for your Patreon page, as you're writing your newsletter, as you're reaching out to friends and family, as you're writing on social media about the page, all of which I think is important for a good launch.
Nice.
That's
Very
great.
cool. Very cool. Yeah, I love the part about understanding your why, and just I feel more musicians need to do that because we intuitively and instinctively know why, but to be able to express it on paper is a whole other story. And it may be important to be able to articulate it that clearly so that you can reproduce that effect to all your different outlets, so it doesn't get lost, it doesn't get watered down each time you put a new communication out into the world. So I think that that is a hugely helpful tip. That's awesome. And not easy. It's not easy to like
No.
pin it down, right? I mean, that's hard.
You got to define it, I think, in a way that's going to set you apart from all the other musicians. That it's a crowded, uh, format for musicians. So defining what makes you original and how you're approaching it is going to pay dividends later on, because people are going to recognize, well, this in all of this musician weeds here, there's this one place that's defined and special, and I can keep on coming back here and I'll get that same thing. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's branding in a way, but
Yeah.
it's more philosophical than visual or sonic, and it's more about like, what's my approach, and
Right.
uh, and that's got to be inviting, because you're on, as a fan of you want to get on a ride with somebody, but you don't want to ride the same bus every day. So if it's starting to feel too much like some other musicians, then it's like, how do you choose where you want to spend your time and money and energy? So yeah, I think that's a really good philosophy to have.
Yeah, when I went into thinking about it, I did go into it as from a branding mindset. Like, I thought like, oh well, this is a question I've never asked myself. I should figure out why. But it actually ended up moving me on a much more philosophical level and gave me a much more personal connection to my work and to, just my life. It made a lot of things make a lot of sense, which I think is one of the reasons why I really encourage people to do it. And some people are more in touch with their selves and their purpose than I am at a baseline. So maybe not everyone will find it as revelatory, but I think even if you've given this thought before, it cannot hurt to stop and connect with yourself from that perspective as you're starting to launch into Patreon world. My approach to launching a Patreon page is very focused on the actual like launch week. And I start a few weeks out with sort of a timeline about how to prepare for launch week. I highly recommend, if you can, launch on a day that has some sort of personal significance to you. I am a big fan of the birthday launch. I think launching on your birthday
Yep.
is shameless and wonderful. It's the best present you can give yourself. It's your highest traffic day. And I like to launch by giving away a few things for free that are available to everyone. So I recommend coming up with a few posts that are exemplary of what you will be offering on the page, whether that's a podcast or recordings or a live, snippet of a show or whatever. Put up a few things. And I love the message. It's my birthday and I have a present for you. Go check it out on my new Patreon page. And so you're driving people to the page. You're gonna get more eyeballs on it because it's your birthday, and then people can download. But if you're thinking like, "God, my birthday was last week. Why didn't you tell me this last month?" I get that, and it's not always your birthday, and not everyone is as shameless as I am, and not everyone wants to spend their birthday that way. So I get it, but if birthday's not an option for you, I do recommend tying it into some kind of anniversary. Like, it's been 10 years since I left home and struck out on my own and moved to the big city, or it's been 3 years since I wrote my last song, or it's been 5 years since, I got my dog. I don't know, probably not the dog thing, but I think it helps to tie it into a bigger story. Um, and again, that's also branding, that's also marketing, that's also trying to set you apart from all of the other pages that exist, all the other Patreons that exist. So I recommend obviously a big splashy launch week and then posting every day on every social media platform for a full week after you launch. Prior to launch, I think it's really important to put a lot of thought, obviously, into every aspect of your page, how you want to handle your tiers, how you want to handle the money conversations, how you want to describe yourself. And that's where your reflections on your why are really going to help. I recommend writing as much of your promotional materials in advance as you possibly can, because I think posting in the morning on all of your social platforms that you're active on is extremely important. And if you have to also wake up and think about what to write, that's going to slow you down. So I think at the very least, write your posts the night before. But in general, I think writing, a few days ahead so that you can sort of get in a groove where you're just getting the information out there the week of is important. I think obviously if you've got an email list, it's really important to engage them. I think it is also critical to reach out to people who are either longtime supporters of yours, people who have participated in your crowd funds before, or people who have, you know, been generous or expressed their encouragement of you in the past, and reach out to them personally or in a smaller group to let them know that you're thinking about doing this, asking for their input. I think if you are in a community that has some people who are particularly involved in a lot of people's careers, for example, in the folk world, we have some people who are super supporters who support 20, 30, 40 Patreon pages or go to concerts every night of the week. I think it's good to reach out to those people, not as a marketing ploy exactly, but because they've seen a lot of Patreon pages. They know what is interesting. So identifying those people in your community and engaging them as you're building your page and inviting them to give you feedback and participate in building it with you, I think is just smart business. One of the most important things, and I can't believe I didn't mention this sooner, is that if you want to launch a Patreon page, I strongly believe you have to be following a few Patreon pages before you launch yourself. It's like you've got to participate in the community a little bit before asking other people to join you there. I just think it's in bad form to like not support any Patreon pages and to then ask people for to support you. But also, I think that following a few Patreon pages gives you the opportunity to scope out what other people are doing and figure out like what feels good to you as a patron, what you enjoy receiving from the people that you support, and what maybe doesn't resonate with you as much. So it's also a little bit of research, but it's also just, I think, polite. And I think that the day before launching, it's a good idea. The day before publicly launching, it's a good idea to reach out to your friends, your family, your close community, and just let them know that this is coming and ask them to get involved quickly and, in the first 24 hours so that when you invite the general public, there's already some movement and some momentum there. And that's in a nutshell kind of how I approach it. I have lots of other thoughts, but they're all written down.
You
Do
made
you
it
guys have
easy
any
for
other
us.
thoughts? You guys have any other thoughts on launching?
I took your advice. I like the birthday lunch. You and I talked actually before I set up my site because you were there just a little bit before me. So when I finally decided that I was going to transition into it, I think that celebratory launch is super important because it brings in people in droves, whereas they might not be so enthusiastic on like Memorial Day on your birthday. It's like an event. So um, and then I had the benefit of just after my launch, about a month or two later, is when the pandemic hit.
Mm,
So I went from having a few hundred to having 1,000 people like really quickly, and mainly because the pandemic brought out everybody's charitable personality types, and everyone was hitting the help button, which was so I got very lucky with the timing of it, if you will. Um, Not to say that the disaster wasn't a disaster in every other part of life, but with that, it really did bring out people that wanted to help out, and I'm sure we all felt it. I think as a whole group, there were just anybody who was a musician on Patreon in the month of March in 2020 saw their numbers go up really, really quickly and astronomically because of the pandemic.
Yeah, we were on the opposite side of that. That we waited just out of fear of the whole thing, because I mean it's a very intimidating thing to get into. We waited until about a year after the whole pandemic started, and by that time everybody was pretty exhausted by it. So what we're seeing is just the most hardcore of our hardcore fans that really came to our support, and it created a really interesting and awesome atmosphere, which I'll get into later, talking about different ways to engage your audience. But uh, going back to a point that you made, Rebecca, that I thought was really awesome and important, that um, we did this, and I feel like it really helped, is to get that social currency going, to reach out to the people who you think will support you beforehand, and kind of giving them advanced access, so that when you go public with the thing, it's got the proof of concept. The people show up and they see that there's already some people there, there's some momentum, and they're more likely to hop on board if they see that you already have a certain number of supporters. So I think that that's really, really important.
Something else I think that is really helpful to think about when you're launching a Patreon page is whether or not you want to come up with sort of a global theme for it. And I think that both of you guys have done a great job with that. I know that Ellis, your thing is like, can you, it's got a long name. Can you tell me what it is? It's,
What do you? I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean?
oh, well, like
Have I
what you
done?
call your Patreon page. You've got like a, it's like, um,
Originally, it was called Ellis Island, but I've moved away from that as it evolved
got it.
into more and more things. And now it's just Ellis Paul's Patreon page. But I'm doing a lot of things within the page, so it's hard to, I was starting to get too many jugglings of, every
Right.
show I do, every live stream is named something different, and there's a archival thing put out every Wednesday, and that's got a name. And so I just
Got it.
decided I would call it Ellis Paul. And that way, if I want to teach, if I want to do a concert, if I want to have an event, if I want to just put art up, it all kind of falls under that umbrella.
Got it. Cool. That makes a lot of sense to me. So rather than branding the whole page, you have a lot of different sort of branded channels within the page, and the whole page is under the umbrella of your name.
Yeah, like every day is destined to have an event. So right now it's Wednesday, Fridays, and Sunday. So there's a Wednesday archival day. There's the Friday traveling medicine show. There's a Sunday Patreon all request show, and so I try and be consistent on the day that those things are happening every week, and that way people, they don't have to check their emails. They just know to go at 8 o'clock. That's when the show's coming on, and I get a consistent crowd showing up that way. So.
Wow.
And James, what about you guys? You guys have a theme for your page, right?
Yeah, we call ours Camp TEOA, and um, it came from the reflection of what you were talking about before, kind of reflecting on why we play music and why we are a band, and some of our most vital uh, pillars of our branding. So, like, some of the things that we really stand for are community and friendship. We're the three members. We're best friends before we even started a band together. Um, and that's really, it's vital to the fabric of our project. So, and just coming up in the punk rock and underground hardcore music scenes, that was just all about that community. So we were all really, really deep into that mindset when making the project. And then also the project really is, we've got a lot about appreciation for the beauty of the natural world and nature and stuff like that. So we trying to think of like, well, what kind of encompasses all those things together? It's like, well, why not, like, kind of the summer camp, the sleepaway camp sort of vibe, that it encompasses the community and it encompasses the natural, to be, the natural beauty of the world. And we just went all in. So everything about it is branded that way. So our patrons are called campers, and our
Such a great idea.
and our live
You got
meetings.
those patches on the tiers.
Yeah, our tiers are merit badges, those embroidered badges that you wearing at camp. I never went to camp, so I guess I just assume that's what you do. But yeah, and our virtual meetings are called campfire Zooms, where you sit around the digital campfire and you just get to the heart of things. So we went all in, and it's a lot of fun. I think it's working.
I love that. It looks
Yeah.
like it's working to me. I think that's really, really brilliant.
Cool.
I like that you can just at a glance get a sense of what's happening like immediately, and how the energy there is just different. It's fresh, and the community thing is really blaring. You know,
Cool.
the second you put it on, you're getting that, and I think that says a lot about the forethought that you put in. And Rebecca, the same thing. It's like if you can just glance at the site and get a sense of who this person is and what this place is, because it's kind of a list of videos and things that mostly people can't access, and but even just in the choice of fonts and the color scheme and the approach to the design, you can get a real flavor for the people and what's happening there. And both of your sites do that really well.
Cool. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I had mine just under Rebecca Loby, Rebecca Loby's Patreon page for many years, and then finally started seeing cool pages, pages that had cool themes to them, like the End of Americas. And I think that Kina Grannis does a really good job with this. The Mouths of Babes do a really good job with this. Bob Schneider, Heather May. These are all pages that sort of have a bigger umbrella theme to them, and I just decided to give it a try. So I just rebranded mine in the past 6 months or so, maybe a year, as Team Loby. And it's just sort of, everyone's on the team. It's just like, I've got really cute little pennant design that a musician named Megan Slankard designed for me. Did a great
She's
job.
good. I love what she
She's
does.
great.
The color scheme's really great, and the designs are really great. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. I'm really a big fan of hiring people who are good at what they do to do things that I'm not good at.
That's,
Yeah.
that's the way.
Rather than
That's-
trying to do everything
the
myself,
trick.
which I did for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on starting? Because I know we have a few other topics to discuss, and I don't want to, spend all our time on this. Although I could give you a chance.
Yeah. Well, I just want to echo what you said before about joining other Patreon pages, or at the very least, just checking out other Patreon pages. We owe virtually all of our inspiration to the people that we looked at their pages and just enjoyed being a part of their pages, like the band Ryan Hood and Heather May, for sure. Like huge shout out to Heather May and her branding sense and all of that. Our tiers and that sort of thing, that was at Heather's suggestion, and just by learning from her. So you really can't go wrong if you go out and you do a little bit of research and just basically enjoy people's pages. And I just wanted to echo that. I think that's really important.
Yeah. I haven't been over to Heather's, but I know her pretty well, and she just does everything well.
Yep.
It's true. It's very true.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm a huge fan.
Yeah.
We could just turn this into a Heather May appreciation webinar.
There you go.
I love her music, and she's on my phone, and when I'm traveling, she'll just come up randomly in the middle of Hamilton. I'll be listening to I have the whole Hamilton soundtrack, and then suddenly it's Heather May time, and it's just a complete shift there. But yeah, it's great when she just pops in.
I love that.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. So should we transition into the next part of this?
Pivot to pivoting.
Pivot to pivoting.
Yeah.
Well, I guess my story is that, for the longest time, I've been on the road doing, 150, sometimes 200 shows a year in my earlier days. And when the pandemic happened, I remember that the day when the cancellations started, it was a day in March, and I had a gig at the City Winery up in New York, and I was driving from Virginia up there. And the phone kept on ringing, and every time I picked up the phone, it was my agent with a cancellation, and it was like my calendar fell like dominoes. I had, the whole year was booked, and then the whole year was gone by the end of the drive. And I got home, and I'm like, what am I going to do? First of all, I got kids and families and rents and mortgages to pay, and I had started in January on my birthday, as Rebecca and I had talked about earlier. She helped coach me into getting the launch going. And we probably had 250 people probably by that time in March. And of course, the floodgates opened up and a bunch of people poured in. And I don't think I did any that any kind of initial pushing for people to go there in March, because I had done so much in January and February that I just kind of was surprised that people started to come in on their own. And I converted all those shows that I normally do on the road, and I started putting them online and on Patreon, at least some of them on Patreon, so they could be archived. And initially, I was playing every single night online for at least a half an hour to an hour every single night. I just go on because I didn't know what was going to happen, and I needed that steady work. If I didn't lock into being a musician, I was just going to curl up and be in a corner in the fetal position, like, and say, "Fuck, I can't. What's happening? I'm going to die. My kids are going to starve. What's going on?" So I needed to play. I needed to play every single night, and I did that for 3-4 months. I played every single night at 7:00. I just went online and played. And eventually that got to be too much, but it saved my life in the beginning, my mental and emotional life, and my sense of work, my sense of self was saved by it. And much of it was, saved onto Patreon because of course we can archive all the shows that we do there. And then eventually, including now, it turned into 3 shows a week. There's a Wednesday show, which is pretty casual. There's a Friday show with a theme where I bring in a special guest, and Rebecca's been on the show many times. And then the Sunday show is just a Patreon only, all request or special event night where I do like a Beatles album, or I'll do one of my albums, or I'll take requests from just Patreon folks. So those 3 shows a week still keep me in line, keep my professional life. I feel focused and challenged. I put on a tie at some of those shows and light up the room properly, and I just feel like I'm a professional musician, and that's been emotionally important to me. But the main thing that I wanted to talk to people about when I was presenting it is that I don't want the charity aspect to be that kind of a thing. I know that people are giving, and of course they're charitable, but I want enough content where I feel like I'm giving back the amount of money that people are contributing. And I have a dollar level on my Patreon page, and it's got the most of all my people. It's got over 300 people on it. But I also know that those people are tipping in a tip jar every night. So they're accessing the show, and then some of those $1 people are giving $1,000 throughout the course of a year in tips. So I have those sort of lower tier things happening, but at the upper tiers, I'm engaging in one-on-one conversations with people, writing songs with people online, doing one-on-one concerts for people, and doing those kind of things. So as you go up the tiers, there's more and more things that are more and more hands-on and one-on-one. And, I have people paying $1 a month, and I have people paying $800 a month who meet with me every week to write and talk and be creative. So I'm super serving people on one end, and then just playing to my audience on the other end, and people that don't want to get more involved in watching a show here or there are getting that one archival thing that they get every week. That's what the $1 folks get. But I feel like the community is amazing, and because I'm showing up 3 times a week, I have the same 100 to 200 people that just tune into everything. They treat it like it's the Tonight Show, and they just know that 8:00 Ellis is going on. I'm going to be there, and that's created a great sense of community where people have become friends, even online, where they haven't been in the same room together, but they're online chatting back and forth. And I think that gives them a bigger sense of community. And then what's being presented isn't all about me either. The Friday night show is bringing in somebody that they've never heard of, or somebody that they admire, and they get to see what's happening in the folk world with all these emerging artists. And maybe I'll bring in somebody like Tom Rush, or somebody who's been around for 40, 50 years, and sit and talk with him. So there's a sense of community that's even bigger than just me and my music. It's more about the outer folk scene. It's more about creativity. It's more about the songs. And I think they dig that because it keeps them coming back, and it doesn't feel like such a narcissistic kind of enterprise when it's get bigger community outreach like that.
When you mentioned the dollar tier, it reminded me of something that a friend of mine said when I was chatting with her. She's has a background in marketing and now is a fiber artist. She's on Instagram as Badass Cross Stitch and she's doing great. And she was looking at taking her big viral Instagram community over to Patreon. And I told her, the pros and cons of having a dollar tier. And she said, "Oh, I'm definitely going to have a dollar tier." She said, what the hardest thing in marketing is actually getting through to people. And I know that because as a touring musician, the hardest part of my job, I always say, is letting people who want to know that I'm coming to play in their town know that I'm coming to play in their town. It's how many times has it happened between email filters and algorithms that we play in Milwaukee, and then 3 days later, someone says, "Oh, I wish you had told me you were playing in Milwaukee." And it's like, how many more times could I have posted or emailed about this show? And it just
Yeah.
doesn't get through to people. So what she said was, "So you're telling me that there is a thing in the world where somebody pays me $1 and then I always get to access them when I need to tell them something?" Like, yes, please sign me up for that. And I thought that was a really very compelling and very interesting perspective. So I've had a dollar tier for most of my Patreon. Sometimes I take it down when I'm running, doing a joint show with somebody else and we need to have the same levels. Anyhow, it doesn't matter. But so that's a long way of saying I'm not sure I have a dollar tier up right now because I think I took it down during my last cross promo and forgot to put it up. But I am a fan of it.
If you close the dollar tier, can you bring it back up and still have
Oh
everybody
yeah.
that was there pop back up?
Yeah, and everybody who's in the dollar tier right now stays there. They don't even know that it's not displayed on the homepage. You
Oh, you
you
just
can
take
move.
down the display of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm,
Huh. That's
yeah,
interesting.
that's cool. And from a like a business standpoint, I mean, it's a great thing to get people in at $1, and then they have the option to give more, as you're saying, over the course of the year for the tips for the shows and whatnot. So
Yeah, if you get merchandise that
yeah,
somebody at the $10 tier would get, they can just buy it if they want it
right.
separately, and that works. It works fine. I feel like part of the thing with the dollar was it was a pandemic, and I knew that they were most of my people are probably you know they have other patrons that the people that they're being patrons of, so I just wanted to make it as cheap and easy as possible. And again, that monthly little blip that they get in their bank account, if it's $1,
Yeah,
I don't feel like you know they won't mind it as much if as if it was like $25 or $50. So,
right.
but getting them in, I think Rebecca's right. Just getting them in, and then you have access to them, and they're getting way more. I mean, they're getting 3 or 4 posts a week from me for $1 a week. That's I'm over giving to that one tier, and I recognize it, but I also know that they're doing other things to support me and to support other musicians. So it all works its way out. It's perfect.
Yeah.
One thing I did too, one of the things I do is art. And when I was creating my tiers, I did hand drawn pictures of Joni Mitchell and Odetta and Charlie Chaplin,
That's so
people I
cool.
admire. And then I gave those pieces of art to people at the highest tiers who had paid. So they actually got a piece of the Patreon page. Um, and then that was a way of branding for me too, because I want to use the site to share my art and remind people that I'm creative in other ways. So a lot of that design is coming out of me, and I'm not a great artist, but I'm not a bad artist either. And it's a consistent kind of art that works in the posters that I do and some of the other things that I offer people that purchase things as an artist rather than as a songwriter.
Cool. That's really awesome.
I
So
love that.
the images, I'm sorry, the pieces that you gave to people, they're part of your design.
Yes,
That's
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, and it's just a way to lock those people in. Like
Yeah.
the people at the $100 level get a piece of art from me in the mail every year. So to
Wow.
me, and it doesn't have to be something extensive that I've done. I don't make it a line drawing either. It's not like a stick figure with a guitar that just says "Hello from Ellis, love Heart Ellis." I'll do paintings for people, and spend probably 10, 20 hours on the art and then send it out to them. because they're paying, let's say, like $1,000. So again, I don't want it to seem like charity. And if I was going to sell something like a piece of art, I might ask for several $100s for it. So I want to feel like I am meaning what they're contributing, because that I understand that they're looking at it charitably, but I'm not. I'm looking at not an ask, I'm looking at a give. So I'm giving you guys this. I know it sounds like an ask because a model with Amanda Palmer and all these other folks is like, hey, don't be afraid to ask. And I recognize that there's something in that, but I also am really super aware of the give. And from my perspective, like if someone's going to pay $800 a month to me, I want to meet them once a week and sit
Yeah.
down with them. And I just don't want to take the money, and I want to make sure I feel good about it.
Right.
So that's one thing. But again, if you only have a few tiers, I don't see any problem with giving the same thing out to everybody. And my assistants, like, nobody cares. They just want to give. And I said, I know they do, but I want to be the one giving. I want to make sure that I'm meeting what their expenses are, so that they feel good and they stick around. And because there is an attrition. Well, I think I've probably had 14 or 1,500 people on the site, and right now I'm just under 1,000. So people do come and go, but most of the people that go are looking at it as a charity rather than like as a one-man Netflix, which is how I'm looking at it. So I'm trying to constantly get people to buy. This is a special place. There are events here happening that don't happen anywhere else, and it's worth it to stay. There's something special happening here all the time, and if you can convince them of that, they'll stick around. And I think I probably only lose 1% to 2% a month, and then I gain back more than that on the flip side generally if things are promoted.
Nice. Alice, can I ask you, if, like, from the perspective of somebody that may not have had or does not have as big a potential audience to build their initial Patreon supportership as you may have, or Rebecca, or as you may have, do you have any like thoughts? And I'm honored to be a part of this conversation, because I feel like I reflect a part of the viewership that has not as quite a developed fan base as you guys. Although, I mean, we've done well, but I feel like I represent
All the
that.
time.
I represent that crew. I feel like, so this is part for me too. But I'm sure there are people out there that are thinking like, well, if I start a Patreon and I have this, and I can expect to get this amount of support, whether it's financial or whatever, do you put in the amount of effort that it sounds like that you need to put in every day, every week, every month? And is there a point when you kind of, you say, well, I am, because it will build to something by putting in this amount of effort, it will build to where I need it to be? Or is it kind of like, well, it'd be insane to dedicate my 40 hours a week to, not that you are, but to this, if I'm not quite at that level? Do you have any thoughts
Yeah.
on that?
That's I think what Rebecca was saying, and that you've already done with your site, by thinking ahead of time and branding it so that the moment of the launch feels settled and you're not wobbling at the front end. I think that has a lot to do with the success of a startup Patreon person. And once you're in it, of course, you're gonna learn how to make the most of it and make changes and evolve within it. But getting that front brand where you said you're about community and you're about nature and you want the camp vibe, all of that stuff, having that figured out before you start, because you only get one chance to launch. And that first couple months is the most important time, I think, because it establishes you, and then the numbers come in, and then nothing attracts a crowd like a crowd.
Right.
If you have 200 or 300 people, they're looking at your numbers and they're saying, wow, a lot of people are here. Maybe something's happening. And it looks great. So, all of those things can mean a lot. But I used to be a touring musician, and now I'm a content creator. That's really what my job is now.
Yeah.
I instead of doing
I've
15
been calling.
go ahead.
Sorry,
Yeah.
15 I'm just saying, I've been calling myself a stay-at-home touring singer-songwriter
Yeah,
for
that's
the
it,
past few
right?
years.
Here's my commute. And there it is. Look, I went to work. Yeah. So, I mean, that's basically it. Like now I'm trying to figure out, well, how do I incorporate live touring back into the world, the new world that I've created for myself?
Mhm.
And is being at home better for me creatively and financially in it? And I think there's a balance between the two now. But I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I was on a gerbil wheel for 20, 25 years, just trying to make ends meet by constantly being on the road ad nauseum every weekend, three or four shows. And I think the pandemic offered time to be a little more reflective and maybe breathe a little bit and find creative ways to make a living like Patreon that can feed live touring in a better way.
Mm.
And so I don't know what it's going to look like a year from now when things get back to normal, if they do. But I think I'll probably be doing more like 8 or 9 shows, 10 shows tops per month rather than 15, 20,
Right.
which was crazy.
Yeah.
And thank God for Patreon, because that it offers this balance, and you can connect with people from all over the world personally and make the rent if you're lucky.
Well, and James, I hear your question about like how much to invest in it upfront time wise if the audience is really small. I think that's basically, if your initial audience isn't enough to kind of cover your bills, do you still throw yourself at it with by investing the amount of time that you would invest if it was able to support you
Right.
more financially? And I think that that is a tricky balance. And I think that's one of the reasons why I emphasize in my approach so much that launch week, like Ellis was saying, to make the launch as successful and stable as possible, because you only get that launch moment once. And when I look
Right.
over all of my numbers for Patreon, the biggest amount of growth my Patreon has ever had was in the first 24 hours. And the second biggest period of growth was just that first week. And then the third biggest was the first month. And then everything since it, that's like a, and then everything after that is like a very slight incline, and
Yeah.
sometimes it's break even. Sometimes I'll do a special promotion and it'll tick up in a month. And then sometimes, there I'll lose a few people, especially when you have bigger donors. I mean, when you have like, or not donor, we don't like the word donor, but when you have bigger supporters, investors, whatever you call them, patrons,
Mhm.
losing one person at $100 or losing one person at $250, which both of which have happened, and do happen, can really hurt, when
Right.
you're trying to, live on it. Whereas I always say I would rather have 1,000 $1 patrons than 4 $250 patrons, because that makes it's stressful worrying about whether you're going to lose those people at the higher levels. I digress. Um,
But
as
pardon,
Ellis
pardon
mentioned,
me, if you
yeah,
don't
no,
mind me
jump in.
jumping in.
Not at all.
Part of me in my mind thinks, what if I ran my business here entirely? Like part of me thinks, if it's only $1 a month and that's $12, and that's the cost of an album, and I sell maybe 10,000 albums, why can't I get 10,000 people to sign up on Patreon for $1?
Mhm.
Mhm.
And to me, that's not an unviable idea. I look at Amanda Palmer, who has what, 20, 30,000 people on, and she's doing it. And then why can't we? And I think part of it is that people see this as a charitable thing, and they're buying into like this subscription model, which is still new in the greater world. It's still new, but this could be the paradigm where we all function as independent artists, where we treat it like it's just our mailing list. Hey, come and join this place for $1. And then why couldn't we get 10,000 people to sign up? Why couldn't we do it and think of it like that? So I think part of the challenge for all of us is to define what we're doing and explain it to people so that they see it as not just a place to get like a little video. This is the home of my art.
This
This
is
is a
where it happens.
this is where it happens.
Right.
And this is where and if you're not here, you're not going to get it, at least not in the same way. You're going to get pieces of it that are loose and extraneous, but the heart
Mhm.
of all of it, the root of all of it is here. And it's not a charity. This is my job. And I think that's that's what I'm looking at in the next few years is how do I create in the minds of the people that love my music, how do I get them to accept this as being, this is where I do it. I don't exist in your radio or on Spotify and just at shows. This is where I do it. And wouldn't that be cool?
That is
Like
cool.
wouldn't that be an amazing thing? I don't know if it's
I have
possible or
seen
not.
people. I have seen people run their Patreon pages as like temporarily transition their Patreon pages into being the crowdfunding for a particular project. Carsey Blanton did this a few years ago, rather than doing a Kickstarter. Nora Jane Struthers did it at least once that I remember. Kina Grannis did it when she left her major label deal and she restructured her Patreon page as her record label. And she said, and that's her theme is like, you guys are my record label. Um, and wrapped it into sort of fundraising for an album, which is, I think there are pros and cons because it doesn't give you that big infusion of cash up front, which can sometimes be kind of crucial to like covering recording costs up front, which you can get from a crowdfunding campaign. But also, obviously, it's really wonderful to get people involved in a more ongoing, sustained way and a way in which they feel more invested in the overall process than just the one single project. Might be
Yeah,
something to consider.
I'm running into that problem because I'm about to put out a record and I need to do a fundraiser for it because Patreon doesn't cover enough to cover
Yeah.
a whole album project. I can live off it, but I can't do much more than what I'm doing on Patreon. So, and then you feel like, am I over asking? And how is there a way to blend the two together? And I haven't figured it out yet, but it's challenging, But I think fortunately, people are getting used to the new, sea change that's happened of indie artists doing these kind of things. So I think you can do both, but I can't expect to make what I made in the past on an album fundraiser because so many of those people have already contributed hundreds and hundreds of dollars through Patreon. So, um, you know, it's one of these things like, how do I do both
Right.
without seeming like I'm asking for too much from them? And
I've
I
only
have,
done it once since I started my Patreon page. I did one fan funding thing and I gave I can't remember exactly. I think that what I did was everyone who was a patron, and I just announced this within Patreon. It didn't need to be announced publicly, but everyone who was already on Patreon got a one level upgrade. So
ah,
somebody who donated $10 to the album campaign, if the next tier up was $20, they got the $20 prize.
wow. That's,
That's
And
cool.
that's a great idea.
that was sort of a way of acknowledging, like, I know I'm asking again, but, and also acknowledging what they're giving. And I mean, some of those prizes, like the $500 prize package was pretty significant. So if somebody gave 200, was comfortable giving 250, then they would get bumped up to the $500 level. And that felt sort of commensurate with what they were contributing and
That's great.
acknowledging, the contributions they'd already made.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, and then the branding's got to be a little different as well.
Mhm.
Like the vibe over there can't be the same vibe as here, and like the art, you can't have the T-shirt over here and the same T-shirt available on Patreon. There's all sorts of things to think about that I haven't thought through yet. But
A lot of moving pieces.
yeah, yeah,
Well, I'm trying to think if there's anything about pivoting left to cover. Like moving it's not about the topic wasn't about moving existing fans over so much as like reframing your life, right?
yeah. And it's essentially me doing a bunch of shows online and then releasing music and art and archival things. That's what my Patreon page is, and that's not unlike what I was doing out in the three-dimensional world. It just changed to being all in here, and so far so good. It's working, and now I need to find a way back out there and to balance them together. But again, James, I'm aware that I've been around for 30 years, so I've a well-trained audience. Unlike the 1% of people's social media thing, it's more like 10% for me.
Mm.
People know and have followed me long enough to just come along with me wherever I go. So and I know it's not easy for upstarts to start this place, but like Rebecca said, if you and you did say this, James, too, that if you think ahead of it and get branding down and who you are down, define that in the space, and keep working at it. And the more people that come, the more you'll want to invest. But you just make whatever you're doing great, because, you're not going to get that first impression back. And those are essential.
Right.
The very first page of the ebook that I wrote is about expectations, and is the first thing I said today. And the reason I put that page in, I just remembered, is that when I finished the ebook, it was done, did not have a page about expectations, and I sent it to a few people to proofread. And my manager, Ralph Jackadine, who teaches students at Berklee College of Music, said, "Oh, this is great. I'm going to send it to my business students at Berklee. I know some of them want to start Patreon pages." And I said, "Hold on a second." And I went and wrote a page about expectations, specifically because I felt that it was important to make sure that college students, people graduating into the world, people in their first year of performing professionally or not, know that it's not reasonable to expect. And this is a bummer, and I feel like a freaking witch for saying this, but it is not reasonable to expect that you can build a Patreon page that will bring in lots of money without an existing audience. That's just it. There might be a few exceptions to that rule, but in general, from my observations across a number of different fields, people who have Patreon pages with large followings, I'm in my brain, large is, I don't, you want to put numbers on it, but like dozens or hundreds of thousands of people, um, have an audience somewhere. That doesn't necessarily mean they've spent years touring, although the musicians I know who have big Patreon followings generally have spent some years on the road touring and collecting people into their world. But sometimes it's a giant YouTube following or big numbers on Spotify, those which can be achieved from home. But it generally doesn't, the audience generally doesn't come from Patreon. Patreon isn't really a discovery platform.
Right.
So I just want to be blunt about that, because I don't want to send anyone out like, oh, if I do all of this work, if I make great content and I really push to the small group of people I know, I'm going to be able to burst forth with a Patreon page that will then support me and pay my bills, and I can focus on art. Unfortunately, I just haven't seen it happen that way yet. I'd love to be proved wrong, but that's not what I have seen so far.
Right.
Becca's a bummer.
No, that's so important. That's so important. And actually, I feel like it transitions really well into the third segment of the conversation about ways to engage with an audience. And I think that when you're trying to consider ways to engage with your Patreon audience, you need to understand who they are and how they fit into the bigger picture of you as an artist. These are not people that walked by a storefront window, saw something flashing, and went like, I think I'll pull out my wallet and give this person $10 a month for the rest of my life. Those are not the people. Those are the people that saw one of your posts on Instagram and because they follow the singer-songwriter tag or whatever. Those are the casual people, your casual audience, or the people that heard your song on a Spotify playlist because they listen to chill coffee shop folk music or whatever. Those aren't the people that will be joining your Patreon. So in considering how to engage with the people on your Patreon, and at every level of your uh, of your musical world, you got to really know where these people fit in the greater picture. And with your social media being your casual audience, and maybe your mailing list subscribers being supporters, not casual supporters, but they support you more than their fans. Let's say your Patreon supporters, they are the top of that pyramid, and they're the very the smallest part of your audience. And that is how you want to remember that when you're engaging with these people. You want to remember that they've been through they've climbed all these other rungs in their fandom, and they've made it to the end of this journey, not the end of this journey, but actually maybe consider it, they've come through the door and now they're beginning their relationship with you as an artist and supporter. So our whole thing at the End of America has always been to engage with our fans and get to know the people that come to our shows as best as we can. And when we were playing live all the time, that looked like showing up early and not being backstage before the show. As tough as that can be sometimes for your warm up routine or just get in the right headspace, um, we found that to be really good. We wanted to actually kind of feel like we made a couple friends before we hit the stage. And in the folk worlds, there's the two set show format, which is not as common in other, in other live music formats. But you do a 45-minute set, and then then you hang out for 15 minutes, and then you go do your second set. We would always just go out into the audience, or we'd go hang by the merch table, and then after the show, we'd always just hang until the venue kicked us out. I mean, that'd be our MO. And when we lost touring, we felt like we lost what was the most important aspect of our, most important tool that we had to connect with people. And so when we started our Patreon, we started it with the intention of making it as much like that part of our live show as we possibly could. And that includes just making ourselves available, just completely available, sharing our email address, encouraging people to hit us up via email privately or engage us in the comments. And having branded the thing Camp TEOA with the campfire, sitting around the campfire, we really wanted to drive that home and just make it as strong as an atmosphere with a very strong back and forth, instead of it like a sort of, we're transmitting to people, we're broadcasting. We wanted it to be a conversation that could go both ways. And we've made great friends, like you were saying, Ellis, how over the course of your time doing this, you see the same people show up. They've got more access to you, so there's just opportunity for deeper levels of conversation, and that's just been vital for us. So that's my original my initial pitch into the ways to engage an audience. And you guys, having been in the Patreon game longer than I have, I'm really interested to hear how you guys also engage with your audience too. I think it'd be super valuable for people watching this, and also I would love to learn from you guys too. So I'd be interested to hear what you got to say.
One thing, James, that I love how you described it. The word engage means not just the artist putting stuff out, but the person who's listening to interact. So Patreon, if you treat it like it's just a broadcast center for you to go out into the world and not really engage, just sort of egotistically just sitting there, hey, this is me, here's my song, then see you next week. You won't get any kind of, commitment from the people that are paying you, that they're going to jump. But that engagement, if they get to interact with you, if you're responding to their, emails, if you're within the platform, if you're responding to their texts during their live stream shows and putting up the stuff on the screen so people can see it, if you're writing the thank you notes for the tips, all of those things where you circle back, they circle in, you circle back, they circle in. And that's why they want to be there, because they can watch you on Spotify and Facebook. They don't, if that's all they're into, then there's plenty of places they can do that. But that idea of engaging, like you said, of interacting and connecting, and then giving, taking, and that's how you get people to stay. And you get people to give even more and more and more, the more you're willing to give and do that. And so it's hard though, because some of us are shy. I'm not one of them, but I know that some folk musicians are fairly awkward socially. And I mean, this is the thing about being a folk musician. We just used to write songs and drive around, and suddenly we're running little media empires. Yeah. Like, what the fuck is this?
Yep.
It's like, how do you find time to write a decent songs when you're trying to pitch your Patreon anniversary as I am right now? So But just remember that, God, if you can just connect, these people are, it's like a high school football game. The stands are full and they're all cheering for you. And after the game, man, you got to walk over there and
Yeah.
body surf or do something, get involved in ways that make them feel recognized,
That's
because they're,
that's it, to make people feel recognized, and not because it's like, "Oh, well, my metrics will look better," but, I mean, we all wanna be recognized, and people deserve to be recognized, and that's I love that word, that's great.
it feels better too for you as an artist. It's like, wow, I actually have people that I love who are here.
Yeah.
I have a fan of mine who's going to climb in the car with me for 3 days this weekend and travel with me.
Whoa.
You know, I know him very well. Trust me, he's been fed it. But yeah, I mean, if I didn't have this kind of place where we could interact, I wouldn't be as comfortable to let him in. And, you know, people love it. Imagine if the
Well,
Beatles had done this, how big they would have been.
I know. God.
they really could have made something
They
of
Yeah,
could
themselves.
have
could have
done,
made a splash.
could have done something.
James, I love what you said about all the doors that people have to go through in order to land in the Patreon room, and how
Yeah.
has always felt to me sort of like a concentrated space where, when I started my Patreon page, I was thinking, oh, I need to be a smart business lady and open up a new revenue stream. But it immediately became something so much more important to me than that. It immediately became obvious that this was a space where the people who are the most committed to what I do, the most interested, the most encouraging and enthusiastic, were all congregated in this one little corner of the internet with no email filters, no algorithms, no Mark frickin' Zuckerberg. It's just us. And they are eager to hear what I have to say and to hear the music that I have to share. And the first 6 months that I launched my Patreon page was the most creatively prolific time that I've ever had. I wrote more songs in that little span of time because I wrote more songs in that little span because all of those people were so eager to hear them, and I was so eager to share. And it was just something kind of chemically that went off in my brain and like fired me up. And since then, the connection part has remained like sort of what's most valuable to me, the connection and enthusiasm and encouragement that I get from this really concentrated group of super supporters. Now, something I have noticed that I have heard reflected by some other musician friends of mine with Patreon pages is that of my patrons, there are some folks who are just along for the ride, who like what I do enough to want to throw a few bucks in the window every month so that, I can keep doing what I do. But they don't necessarily log into Patreon often or comment on everything I post. I think there are some people who never download anything I post onto Patreon. And I think some of those people give fairly significant amounts of money. But then there are a small group within the Patreon community of super duper fan supporters, super duper patrons who download every single thing, comment on every single post, and it's not a huge percentage of people
Right.
who are consistently all over everything I post. And I think that creates a really interesting situation where I want to create content that is valuable enough and meaningful enough that the people who are going to download every single thing that I post feel like it's worth the time and energy they put into the Patreon page. But since that's a small subset of a small subset of people, I don't I don't want to put too much time into creating content that's only going to be available on Patreon forever, because for so many people, their reason for being involved in my Patreon is to support my ongoing work, not to support me spending a lot of hours on stuff that's only going to live on Patreon. So I try to make everything that I share on Patreon kind of useful from a few different angles. Like I always, I do Patreon exclusive concerts, Team Lobi exclusive concerts, all request shows, and those are just for patrons. But then I also will do videos where I'm able to, hire a camera person and do a multi-camera shoot and, do like a decent recording of it that I premiere on Patreon, but then eventually goes to YouTube where it has the possibility, especially the cover songs, of attracting people from, the wider world who are searching for, like a, Bob Dylan cover and come across my version of Forever Young and decide they like it. And then that brings them into my newsletter or my email list, or using the Patreon is a way to share work I need to do other for other reasons, like making a song chart for my band or recording a demo of a new song, things like that. So for me, it's sort of finding that balance between like serving the super supporters, but also respecting their desire to kind of keep me moving forward by not getting too bogged down in spending lots of time making things that are exclusive to Patreon.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
that makes a ton of sense, and I think that we sort of are aware of the same thing, that the people who are supporting you don't want your Patreon page to keep you from actually doing what you do, which is writing and releasing music. So I think that in the same sense, we rely on advanced access, and it, as sort of like sharing stuff that we're going to use out there in the world, in the public world, a little later, but they just get it first. But a lot of the other stuff, a lot of the rest of the value, we think comes, at least with the people that are supporting us now, we think comes from the access to an interaction, so like the Zooms where we just all get on and it's just sort of like, hey, you guys talk. What's important to you right now? Not very much like ask us questions about our band. Not so much. Although that's not a bad thing, but it's more just like we find that the value comes from the content that doesn't require any planning. It's just more like being available and being there. Um, yeah,
It's kind of like you're the mayor of your own little town, and people just want
Yeah.
a chance to shake your hand and say hi and maybe grab a coffee.
yeah,
It feels a little bit like that,
yeah.
and there's so many heartwarming kind of things about it, and I don't know where it's going to evolve. That in the greater picture, 10 years from now, the subscription model is, I think, going to be much more acceptable for people, and obviously it is with Netflix and Apple TV and all these things, but I think it's just going to start seeping down into the independent musician, independent artist, independent writer, and I think more and more people will be coming to us. So I think it's hopeful, but again, getting people out of the idea that it's just a charity, and that this is just a chance for them to give to their favorite act, because I don't know that it's that intriguing as a charity. For the short term it is, but for the long term, I really want to make sure I'm just creating content that is worth the money and the value that they're putting in.
Right.
That's
Well, and
that
that's
it all
something I
comes
love
back
about
to that.
Patreon is that as you said earlier, it's all archived. So I love the pitch that like if somebody joins my page for $1 or $3, they immediately get access to over 6 albums worth of unreleased songs, you
Wow.
know? And I think
Yeah.
I love being able to say that. I love that that's true.
One of the things I'm pitching now, because I'm about to do my anniversary pitch, and today is the first day of it actually. But tomorrow, the thing that I'm giving people is the pre-production work I'm doing on my album. I did one of the songs here in my home studio, and it came out great. I'm really happy with it. But I know when I go to the studio, it's going to be ratcheted up a couple levels. But I'm giving them that song on Patreon tomorrow. And so they'll get a glimpse at the new record, but they'll get this thing that only exists on Patreon. So that will never be released anywhere else. That version of that song will only be released on Patreon.
Love
And
that.
anything like iPhone demos, I put those up sometimes as the weekly song that I'm giving them, and so that they get to see the songs undressed, and a little bit
Mhm.
more raw, and then they feel like wow, we're really watching the process with them. And I'm even throwing up cameras during the recording sessions and recording stuff on Patreon so people can just come and watch the studio for an hour or two without me engaging with them.
Hmm.
That's
They
so
just
cool.
get to see what's going down.
That's awesome.
Just stuff that they're not going to get by being a fan on Spotify or YouTube. And um, some of the stuff later on I'll release to those places, but I just want them to feel like they're getting the backstage look.
Yeah.
Well, and that footage could be useful, in
Yeah, you
putting
never know.
together promo materials or whatever. That's really cool. Well, I think that our time together is drawing to a close. This has been really such a fun conversation. James and Ellis, you guys are so cool, and your Patreon pages are so inspiring. Um, you can find me on the internet. Obviously, I have a Patreon page. It is patreon.com/Rebecca Loby. And also, I just recently redid my website and I'm so proud of it. It's RebeccaLoby.com. It's got tour dates. I actually have some tour dates on it. With any luck, I'll be in the UK about a month from now for a full tour over there. And it's also got lyrics for every song I have ever released. It's the coolest website I've ever had. I'm very excited about it. And then, of course, please don't forget that during lockdown, I wrote an ebook called How to Launch on Patreon or Patreon Launch Tips or something. And there's a link for it here. And I'd love for you to check it out because it's just all of my thoughts about having a successful and well-prepared Patreon launch. And it's free. And I'd love for you to have it. And I guess thanks to NERFA for having me. That's it. I'm done.
Guys, you can find me at Patreon/Ellis Paul and tune in to my website, which is ellispaul.com. And yeah, good luck on your Patreon journey. Both of these guys have extraordinary sites. There's a lot to be learned from just looking at how they function within this platform. And I just want to say good luck, and we'll see you out there somewhere.
Yep, very honored to be a part of this conversation. I feel like I learned more than I spoke, and that is always a really awesome thing to feel. And yeah, my name is James. I am a part of the band The End of America. You can find us online at teoamusic.com and our Patreon page /TEOA music. And I also run a website where I share thoughts and tips for DIY musicians on strategy and mindset. And you can check that out if you're curious about that. It's forestparkdiy.com. Really, really honored to be here, and grateful to NERFA and to Rebecca and Ellis.
Thank you for joining us for that fantastic conversation. If you would like to be part of the conversation, click below and there'll be a registration for a Zoom conversation directly following the panel for you to join the panelists, members of the NERFA community, and staff to talk about how you can take Patreon and turn it into a tool that can enhance your career. We'll see you soon.